In 1914, German aviators flying night reconnaissance over France noticed something they could not explain. Paris was encircled by a ring of reflected moonlight, millions of glass objects stretching to the horizon. Inside that ring, vegetables grew through winter without heating fuel. For over 2 centuries, gardeners had perfected this system. They harvested lettuces in January. They fed millions from tiny plots. Then the horses disappeared from city streets, and the energy source that powered winter growing vanished with them. Within decades, the knowledge was erased. The manuals survived. No one read them. The archive opens in 1845 in Paris, where 2 working market gardeners have just won a competition they entered 3 years earlier. J.G. Moreau and J.J. Davern are not scholars. They are practitioners, men whose hands have turned soil, whose backs have bent over beds, whose livelihood depends on coaxing vegetables from the ground when everything outside is frozen. The competition asked for a practical manual on market gardening. What Moreau and Davern delivered was something far more significant. Their Manuel pratique de la culture maraîchère de Paris documented an entire civilization of food production that had been refined over generations and that would vanish within a century. Manuel. The numbers they recorded should be impossible. 1,800 market gardeners working 1,378 hectares within Paris city limits, 9,000 people employed, an average garden of less than 2 acres. And from these tiny plots, 8 harvests per year: asparagus in December, lettuce in January, strawberries in April, melons in June. Paris was not only self-sufficient in vegetables year-round, it exported to England. The technology that made this possible was elegantly simple: the cloche and the couche chaude. The cloche was a hand-blown glass bell jar, 24 centimeters high, 31 centimeters in diameter, with glass 3 to 4 millimeters thick. Place it over a transplant, and the air beneath warms 8 to 12 degrees Celsius above the outside temperature. A microclimate, a private spring inside a winter garden. But the cloche alone was not enough. Beneath the soil lay the couche chaude, the hotbed. Fresh horse manure mixed with straw, piled and turned, generates temperatures of 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit as it decomposes. The maraîchers packed this manure 2 feet deep, topped it with 6 inches of compost, and planted into biological heat that sustained itself for weeks. Hotbed. Individual farms operated with up to 5,000 cloches each. The total across Paris reached numbers that seem hallucinatory today. By 1914, German aviators flying over France at night could identify Paris from the air. The city was encircled by a ring of glass, 6 million cloches gleaming in the moonlight. Moreau and Davern's manual opens with a philosophy that captures the maraîcher spirit: to obtain the best yield from the soil without excessive expenses, through the judicious selection of crops and through appropriate work. Such is the goal of the market gardener. A master gardener of their era offered simpler advice: always choose the smallest plot of land possible, but grow it exceptionally well. Yield. These were not subsistence farmers scratching survival from marginal land. They were called les orfèvres du sol, the goldsmiths of the ground. Artisans transforming ordinary earth into vegetable gold through intensive care rather than extensive acreage. Goldsmiths, the maraîchers took their name from the land itself. Marais means marsh, the drained wetlands around Paris where market gardening first took root. By 1912, at the system's peak, there were 2,450 to 2,500 maraîchers surrounding the city, 10% of them still working plots within Paris proper. Maraîchers. Step into one of these gardens in January, and you would see something that seems to belong to a different climate. Snow on the path, frost on the walls, but under the glass bells and wooden frames, green things growing. The beds warm to the touch even as your breath fogs in the cold air. January. The precision of their methods reads like engineering specifications. Fresh horse manure mixed with 1/3 to 1/2 straw. Piled for 10 days, turned every 3 days. The heat builds. When the temperature stabilizes, beds are constructed, 5 feet 5 inches wide, with pathways of 9 to 12 inches between them. Manure packed 2 feet deep, compost on the top, and over each plant, the cloche, its thick glass capturing warmth by day and radiating it through the night. Succession planting meant no bed ever sat empty. As one crop was harvested, the next was already growing beneath the glass. The maraîchers did not fight the seasons. They manufactured their own. And the fuel for all of this? Paris provided it freely. The city's 80,000 horses produced 344,000 tons of manure annually. What the streets considered waste, the gardens considered energy. Decomposition was not a problem to be managed. It was the engine of the entire system. 6% of all land within Paris was devoted to this intensive vegetable production. The maraîchers fed 2.5 million people from plots averaging less than 2 acres each. In 1864, the horticulturist Vincent Gressant published Le Potager Moderne and documented something that anticipated modern organic agriculture by over a century. For vegetable growing, he wrote, chemical fertilizers do not do all that one wants. They stimulate the plant and produce quantity, but to the detriment of quality. He made a remarkable observation. Insect pests only attack weak, sickly plant specimens lacking proper nutrition. One does not see pest problems in Parisian market gardens wherever copious compost use and rational crop rotations are practiced. The maraîchers understood something we have systematically forgotten. Solar gain plus biological heat plus glass thermal mass equals year-round production without fossil fuels. They worked with decomposition as an energy source. They turned a city's waste into a city's food. But understanding something is not enough to save it. What the maraîchers built over 2 centuries would vanish within decades, not because it stopped working, but because the world around it changed. In 2011, a research team from INRA, the French National Institute of Agricultural Research, and Agro-Paris Tech, arrived at a small farm in Normandy with a question that seemed almost naive. Could 19th century Parisian intensive methods actually work in modern conditions? Could small-scale, hand-tool-based market gardens be economically viable compared to mechanized agriculture? The farm was La Ferme du Bec Helouin, founded in 2004 by 2 complete outsiders, a former sailor and a former international lawyer named Charles and Perrine Hervé Gruyer. They had been studying the old manuals. They had adopted bio-intensive methods descended directly from the Parisian maraîchers, and they claimed results that the academic establishment found difficult to believe. The researchers, led by François Léger, spent 4 years documenting what the Hervé Gruyers were actually producing. The findings were published in 2015. From a market garden of just 5,500 square meters, about 1 1/3 acres, the farm generated yields worth €55 per square meter per year. This was not an ideal projection, but measured output over 4 growing seasons. This translated to enough vegetables to feed approximately 100 people year-round with just 4 workers. But the historical comparison was what made the research team pause. When they examined 19th century yield records, they found the Parisian maraîchers had achieved up to 250 tons per hectare at the end of the 1800s. The Bec Helouin farm was approaching those numbers. Modern bio-intensive research confirmed the mechanism. 4,000 square feet cultivated with these methods can feed one person a complete diet. Conventional agriculture requires 15,000 to 30,000 square feet for the same outcome. That is 200 to 400% higher productivity per unit of land. The thermal data explained part of it. Glass cloches create soil temperature increases of 8 to 12 degrees Celsius. Hotbeds generate sustained temperatures of 57 to 71 degrees Celsius at their peak. Combined, these extend growing seasons by 2 to 4 months in either direction. A garden in northern France operates as if it were located in a different climate zone entirely. The cloche system works like a glass battery. The manure generates heat, the glass captures and stores it, and the thermal mass of the soil retains it overnight. Every element does double duty. It is engineering disguised as gardening. What the researchers documented should no tractors work, according to industrial agricultural logic. Tiny plots, no tractors, no synthetic inputs, no heated greenhouses. Yet the yields approached or exceeded modern intensive operations. The historical maraîchers had achieved what we assumed required fossil fuels, using only sunlight, glass, and horse manure. If this system worked so well, if it fed millions without fossil fuels, why did it disappear? The answer lies not in the gardens themselves, but in the streets of Paris, where something was changing. This is not a story of deliberate suppression. No one passed a law against glass bells. No regulatory agency classified cloches as a menace. What happened to Parisian market gardening was not conspiracy. It was convergence, a series of economic shifts that, taken together, made an entire food system obsolete. The timeline tells the story. 1912, the peak. 2,450 to 2,500 maraîchers, 10% still within Paris proper. 1959, only 626 remain, just 2 within Paris intramuros. 1969, Les Halles Baltard, the great iron and glass market halls that had connected growers to eaters for over a century, is demolished. 2010, just 74 maraîchers in the entire region. 2017, René Carsante's farm in Saint-Denis, the very last direct link to the old system, closes its gates. What happened? The horses disappeared. Paris's 80,000 horses had produced 344,000 tons of manure annually. That manure was not waste. It was the fuel that powered every hotbed, every couche chaude, every winter lettuce grown under glass. As automobiles replaced horses through the 19-teens and the 1920s, this supply simply vanished. One French source recorded the epitaph with painful clarity. Les cloches et les châssis sont remises, et la culture sur couche chaude, faute de fumier, disparaît. The cloche and frames were stored away, and hotbed cultivation, lacking manure, disappeared. But manure was only the first blow. Railroads followed. By 1896, 82% of vegetables sold at Les Halles still came from the Île-de-France region, the local gardens. But rail transport soon enabled produce from southern France to reach Paris cheaply, then produce from Spain, from North Africa. Why grow lettuce under glass in January when you could ship it from somewhere warm? The economics of distance collapsed. Seasonality became optional for those willing to pay the fuel costs. Then came urban expansion. Land values. In Paris made gardening economically irrational. 20,000 francs per hectare in 1825 had become 100,000 francs by 1845. By the late 1970s, when Bobigny became a departmental capital, the remaining maraîchers had to relocate entirely. They took their soil with them. because it was both a tool of work and a quality investment. And finally, the destruction of the market system itself. In 1969, Les Halles was demolished. The French journal Jardin de France recorded what this meant. La destruction des Halles Baltard, en 1969, sonne le glas d'un système qui a nourri Paris pendant 150 ans. The destruction of Les Halles Baltard in 1969 sounded the death knell of a system that had nourished Paris for 150 years. They paved the stables and took the manure supply with them. They built rail lines that made distance irrelevant and seasonality optional. They demolished Les Halles and scattered the market network that connected growers to eaters. They replaced hand-blown glass with disposable plastic and called it progress. They created a food system where lettuce travels 1,500 miles because fuel is cheaper than labor. Each substitution made sense in isolation, but together they erased 236 years of accumulated knowledge. In Rayé, agronomist Christine Aubry captured what was lost. The Parisian market gardeners had elevated the cultivation of vegetables to the rank of an art, an aesthetic relationship between the cultivator, the earth, nature, and the countless vegetables cultivated throughout the year. That art was displaced not by something better, but by something cheaper, in an era of abundant fossil fuels that we assumed would last forever. In autumn of 1974, a young American farmer named Elliot Coleman traveled to France with a specific mission. He was looking for a survivor. Coleman had been studying the old manuals, the texts that documented what the maraîchers had achieved. But books can only preserve technique, not touch. He wanted to find someone who still practiced the old methods, someone who could show him what the written word could not fully capture. He found Louis Savier. Savier operated a farm of just over 1 hectare at Ballenvilliers in the Essonne, south of Paris. His methods were unchanged from the 19th century: permanent raised beds, horse manure, compost, cold frames, greenhouses. He was a living link to the 1845 manual and everything before it. Coleman visited Savier 3 times over the following years. The last visit came just before Savier's retirement in 1996. When Savier set down his tools, the last direct heir to the 19th century tradition stepped away from the soil. But the knowledge had been transmitted. Coleman returned to his 4-season farm in Harborside, Maine, and spent the next decades systematically translating French intensive methods for modern practitioners. His books include The New Organic Grower in 1989, 4-Season Harvest in 1992, and the Winter Harvest Handbook in 2009. They carried the maraîchers methods across the Atlantic and into a new generation of growers. And then, something unexpected happened. The knowledge came back to France. In 2004, Charles and Perrine Hervé Gruyère, the sailor and the lawyer, founded La Ferme du Bec et Loin in Normandy. They had read Coleman's books. They had studied the old manuals. They set out to prove that the 19th century methods could work in modern conditions. The research partnership with INRA and Agro Paris Tech validated what they suspected. Their yields matched or exceeded the historical records. The French academic establishment certified that the old methods worked. Here is the haunting irony. As the Centrino research project concluded, it is thus thanks to the North Americans that these forgotten Parisian techniques have been given a new light in France. The knowledge had to travel to America, survive in Maine, and return to Normandy before France remembered what it had lost. Charles Hervé Gruyère responds to skeptics with quiet conviction. Critics often say we want to go back to the Stone Age, but this is about the future. And echoing the maraîchers philosophy across 2 centuries, begin with a small area and concentrate on getting the very best out of it. What was forgotten is being remembered. What was dismissed as obsolete is being proven viable. The knowledge survived in old books, in the memory of a single practitioner at Balinvilliers, and in the determination of outsiders who refused to accept that the old ways were gone. The goldsmiths of the ground left records. Someone finally read them. The question now is not whether the old methods work. The research proved that. The question is whether we will learn them before we need them. Here is what to look for. A traditional glass cloche is bell-shaped, approximately 24 centimeters high and 31 centimeters in diameter. The glass is thick, 3 to 4 millimeters, hand-blown with slight irregularities that mark it as authentic. Antique dealers still carry original French cloches. Sarah Raven in the United Kingdom sells hand-blown Victorian-style reproductions. For those less concerned with tradition, large glass jars or cut wine bottles can serve. Even polycarbonate cloches work, though with less thermal mass than glass. A properly constructed hotbed is warm to the touch even when snow covers the ground outside. Fresh horse manure mixed with straw is piled and turned every 3 days for 10 days, then constructed into beds. Wait until the temperature drops below 85 degrees Fahrenheit before planting. The decomposition generates heat for weeks. Combined, cloches and hotbeds extend growing seasons by 2 to 4 months in either direction. January lettuce is not a fantasy. It is technique. A word of caution. Fresh manure generates significant heat. Plant too early and you will cook your seedlings. Glass is fragile and can crack in rapid temperature changes, and the system rewards skill over scale. Start small. The original manual still exists. Moreau and Davern's 1845 text is freely accessible on the Bibliothèque Nationale de France Gallica digital collection. The foundational knowledge is waiting for anyone willing to read it. 150 years ago, gardeners in Paris harvested salads in January using nothing but glass bells and horse manure. They fed millions without fossil fuels, without plastic, without heated greenhouses. And then we forgot. The horses disappeared. The cloches were stored away. An entire civilization of food production vanished because we found something cheaper, not something better. In an age of climate uncertainty and fragile supply chains, the maraîchers' methods look less like nostalgia and more like foresight. They prove that local food systems can be productive, resilient, and independent of distant inputs. They prove that small plots, intensively cultivated, can outproduce industrial acreage. They prove that decomposition is not waste, it is fuel. The manual survived. The techniques are documented. The research has been done. What the maraîchers knew is not lost. It was only put away for a while. Now you know. They smashed the cloches and paved the gardens. They demolished les allées and scattered the knowledge across old books and aging practitioners. But knowledge is harder to destroy than glass. Someone remembered. Someone wrote it down. Someone traveled to France to find the last survivor of a dying tradition and brought the methods home. And when the time was right, the knowledge returned. Now it passes to you.